So, one of my passions is professional identity and professional identity development of school counselors. So, here I'm going to talk about professional identity as it relates to theory and practice. Why should we be discussing this? So, one of the things that I think is really important for school counselors, not only in the beginning of your career, but pretty much every year in your career, is that you take some time to sort of do that soul searching exercise, whether it's at the beginning of the school year or it's when you're struggling. Um, or it's in some sort of community with your colleagues, to just re-ground yourself about why you're in the profession at all. And in doing that, you need to ground yourself in who you are as a professional. Why did you get into school counseling to begin with? The purpose of your work. Why is it that you do this work? Why is it meaningful for you? And what is school counseling to you? Why is it important work? And then how do you get your work done on a daily basis? What tools do you have access to? And maybe even how can you make it more efficient, make it work better for you on a daily basis? The reason why this exercise is important, particularly in times when you're feeling challenged, is because if you don't ground yourself, someone else will make these decisions for you. And then I think when that happens, you're more likely to burn out in the profession. School counseling is a very difficult job. It's also an extremely rewarding job. But I think the times that we feel challenged, those are the times when we sort of feel like we're losing touch with why we got into the profession in the first place. And that's an important time, I think, to surround yourself with your colleagues who are going to be motivating to you, inspiring to you. That's a time to reach out to your mentors and really ground yourself back into those core reasons why you joined the profession to begin with. So, we're going to take a look at each one of these. So, identity. I like to think about identity really as being the heart, and I'm going to give you sort of a symbol for each one of these things. So, identity for me, when I think about it, it's really at the core of your being as a school counselor. It is the reason that you applied to a school counseling program. It is the thing that gets you up in the morning every day as a school counselor. It is the joy that you feel when your students experience joy. You know, when they have some success, when there is a resolution to something, when there is something to celebrate, when there is some progress being made of some kind. And even sometimes when things are hard and challenging, but you feel like there's, maybe a breakthrough of some kind. So to me, it's those are the moments that we live for. And that really is when we connect to our identity, because it's what brought us into the field to start with. And so for me, I think about identity as being this very sort of spiritual aspect of being a school counselor. And, whether you're a faith-based person or not, I think spirituality is something that definitely fits into the world of being a school counselor, because if it's something that is a calling to you and it's not just a job, then it does evoke that kind of meaning. It's a job that has a lot of meaning. So for me, that meaning is kind of why I give it the symbol of the heart, because it really does come from a place that's very deep within you as a person, and not just as a professional, but it really connects what you love about life with the work that you're doing every day to support students. So, professional identity really is about your core values and your beliefs. It answers the questions: who am I? or who are we, if you're having this discussion with your colleagues, in this work, and why do I or why do we believe it is important? And it's important, I think, to also think about this from a collective sense as well as an individual sense too, because in most cases, school counselors are not working in isolation. Now, that doesn't mean you might not be the only school counselor in your building, but even if you are likely in a district working with other school counselors at other levels, or you're working with other school counselors who are in your district. So even though you might be the only one in the building, you're probably not the only one in your district or in your county. And so it's important, I think, to have that discussion. Like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why do we think school counseling is important? How do we define it for ourselves? And why do we think that we are the ones to be doing this work? Historically, school counseling has had a lot of trouble defining their professional identity. There have been ongoing debates about whether or not we are educators or counselors or both. Which one comes first? Does educator identity come first? Counselor identity come first? And there's still ongoing debates about that. And that likely comes from a lot of different places. It might come from how you were trained in your graduate program and the sort of the orientation, theoretical orientation of the people who trained you, or the sort of structure of your program and how it was housed in your university. So there's still an ongoing debate about school counselor professional identity as it relates to education and counseling. And it also has something to do with our history as well, because we have always been in schools, and yet we have had a role that is more counseling focused than teachers or other people who work in schools. So I do fundamentally believe, and it goes back to what I talked about on the last slide, and identity really being about the heart, is that who you are is what you do, and that shows up every day as a school counselor, which is going to take us to sort of this next piece about theory. So before we go on to theory, I forgot I wanted to share this quote with you, because I think it's important to take a look at this. And we're going to talk about the national model in a couple of places in this presentation. So school counseling programs, even comprehensive ones based on the model, may not be enough to close gaps for all students if they're not put into place by school counselors who clearly and with congruity of thought and action identify themselves as change agents for equity. So what this is saying is that even if you have the model and you're using the model, if you don't have that identity about being a change agent, then the model doesn't really hold up. It doesn't really serve its purpose. So the identity piece has to come first before the model can really be effective. And I really do fundamentally believe that. And I have encountered school counselors who they literally are going by the book. They're going by the national model, but they don't necessarily believe in it. They're going by the book because it is what is being used in their county or their district. They're being pressured to earn ramp. They're kind of just buying into whatever is sort of the push by their administration or by their other colleagues in their department. But there's really been no conversation about, is the model the best thing for our students, for our program? And so this is something that I encourage school counselors to really revisit before they think about using the model, and especially before they think about applying for ramp, is, does this fit with who you are as school counselors? Does this fit with your theoretical orientation? making sure that there is a direct line between your identity, your theoretical orientation, and then the tools that you use, like the national model. So let's go on and talk about theory. So the theory part, and I use the image here of the head. So we go from the heart to the head. And so theory really is the cognitive side of your identity. And we're going to get into what that means in just a minute. But it is sort of it's not as, I don't think it's as spiritual connectedness necessarily, because we learn about theory, right? The identity piece is very instinctual to us. It's very much embedded in who we are. The theory piece is what we learn about in graduate school. And so that's why it's very cognitive. So let's move along. So theory is really the articulation then of the values and the beliefs that you have that guide your practice. So we take everything that you believe about who you are as a school counselor and what you believe school counseling is, how you sort of define school counseling. And it answers the questions of what is the purpose of this work, how and why is it to be done. And so theories sort of give you that cognitive framework, or that sort of cognitive set of principles to use in your work, and they guide your practice. Well, one of the things that has always been interesting to me is that when school counselors, all school counselors pretty much go through a counseling program, and oftentimes the theories course includes mostly traditional counseling theory. So you might include something like psychoanalytic, psychodynamic theories. You might include things like cognitive behavioral theories. If you get maybe a more progressive program, you might include things like relational cultural theory. Maybe you also have some more school kinds of based theories in there, like reality therapy or solution focused, things like that. And there are a whole host of theories, right? But traditionally, the theories that you learn about in graduate program they come from counseling, the counseling field with the big C, not necessarily school counseling. And so we borrowed from those particular theories. And I think one of the reasons why, when you talk to a lot of school counselors, they've sort of dropped this notion of having a theoretical orientation is because they don't really connect with many of the counseling theories, because they're not specific to school counseling. I think many of the school counselors that I talk to, they might connect with more of the relational cultural or systems theory, or feminist theory, or maybe solution focused for various reasons. But still, there are a lot of school counselors that I talk to who are like, I don't really still hang on to my theoretical orientation that was in graduate school, but that doesn't really work for me now. Well, there are school counseling theories out there, but they're relatively newer compared to some of those more traditional counseling theories. And so school counselors may not know them. And I'm going to point you to a source on the next slide if you want to learn more about those school counseling theories. And so the theory piece is really important. I think sometimes it's a missing piece of the equation, because it really does give you something to, it's kind of like your North Star. It's kind of like the thing that you go back to when you're trying to really ground yourself back about, what do I believe all students deserve? What do I believe about the relationship between students and education? What do I believe about what counseling is supposed to do for students? What do I believe about how it's supposed to help families? All those kinds of things. You have to have some sort of worldview or way of thinking about all of that that guides your practice. And that's what your theory needs to be. So I would encourage you, if you're kind of in this space where you haven't revisited this for a while, that you go back and you take a look at it. And again, I'm going to show you a source that you might not be aware of that you can take a look at if you want to look at some school counseling theories that maybe you didn't have in your graduate program. But it really is important to make that connection between identity and practice, and theory is what is in between there. It's maybe going to be the missing link if you don't have it. So here's another quote for you to consider, and I think this is sometimes what happens for school counselors once they get out there and they're using the national model. Now, the national model has been an answer to a question that we've had for a long time in school counseling. When it came out in 2002, 2003, it really was what a lot of us needed. It resolved and kind of solved a lot of problems that we have. But what the national model does, it provides us an overview of what needs to be done. So it's the what part of the equation here, but it does not provide the underlying why and how. The answers to the questions why and how come from the counselor's theoretical orientation, not from the model. So it's very important to keep in mind that the national model is a tool. It is not a theoretical orientation. It is not a professional identity. It's a tool. And it's an extremely helpful tool. It is certainly the go-to tool at the moment, but it's not a theory, and it's not an identity. Now, that being said, the national model can work really well with a number of theoretical orientations. So that's great. It's very flexible in that particular way. But the source that is at the bottom of this slide is the Theories of School Counseling for the 21st Century. It's a 2018 publication, and I would encourage you to take a look at it and consider purchasing it. I can't remember the cost, so it might not be cost effective for you, but if you do want to check that out, it will give you some current school counseling theories. And I sort of put in a shameless plug for myself and my co-author, George McMahon. We have a theory in there called the Ecological School Counseling Theory, which is very systemic in nature. And for me, it makes a lot of sense. It kind of frames schools and school counseling from an ecological standpoint. And we have an article on that too, so you can look that up as well. And that's going to be a lot cheaper than a whole textbook. But there are a lot of really helpful theories that you can find in this particular text. And especially if you haven't thought about theory for a while, I would definitely consider checking that out. All right, and then the last one that we're going to talk about is practice. And I just use the hand here because this sort of indicates that, this is the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And it's like, it's like your to-do list. So you're using your hand to check things off. So the practice piece is, it's not really the cognitive piece of theory, and it's not really the heart piece of identity, but it is how both of those things manifest themselves on a daily basis. So it is the daily work, and it's about the priorities of your work and your program. It's about how your time is spent and the tools that are used. And so we have the ASCA model there because that is very much a priority tool that many school counselors use these days, is the ASCA model. So the practice piece, while it's sort of simplistic in terms of this presentation, it is the most important piece because this is where you're serving students and their families and the staff in your building. And in that way, it's the most significant part of this whole equation. But before the practice piece can come, you really do have to be grounded in the other two pieces as well. So I hope it's helpful just to go back and kind of think about how all of these things fit together and take some time to just sort of think through. I think doing exercises like a vision board or just kind of jotting down words that are meaningful to you, even finding images to keep you inspired as you get ready to go through the school year or when you're kind of in a slump is helpful too. And having conversations with colleagues that you trust and admire or your mentors is important to do as well, just to keep you grounded.